Welcome to the lecture series on object oriented analysis and design. We are now seeing how the business driven, use case driven, requirements driven is likely to facilitate an easier, readily understandable, more productive and a more economical process of software development. Therefore, we will address larger complexity, we will talk about many things that we have been saying as what we said is a top down analysis going hand in hand with the bottom up construction. We build both, top down analysis is happening, bottom up is also happening. In the process, we have not seriously looked at many structural exercises, that is something which the industrial revolution world has been teaching. Organizations restructure, otherwise it becomes unwieldy as a business. What we have done is we have used the idea of software, it is all pervasive, everywhere there is software. It is a wonderful pioneering effort to make people understand that something as abstract as a software will suddenly become in a span of just a decade or so all pervasive. There is nothing that is not impacted by software today. It is something which we should understand very carefully, saying that it is not the restructuring at the coarse grain level. We still want the comfort, we still want the cushioning of what we have been talking about as an organizational chart, the way in which we talked about a risk based or a risk breakdown. We know how to spread many things into the organization almost by instinct. That is how the entire businesses work. And therefore, the business for them is not phased wise, it is our terminology. The software development people started talking about it. This is the business, this is what we do. Everything is one integrated exercise. We do not really want to see things as separate, all of them should have to fall in place, the business happens. For that, we need this kind of a methodology. So, what we did was from work breakdown, for various reasons which I mentioned in the earlier lecture, we started moving towards a workflow which brings the business driven into what is called a use case driven, and from use case driven we can derive all your requirements or requirements driven. Makes lot of business sense to talk about use cases. Once the use cases are ready, very quickly we think that a tool will let us, a set of tools which I described in the earlier lectures will let us go to OAD, analysis and design. After that, just press a button and then everything else progresses, code will come, adequate testing will happen, everything is automatic. So, what we did is a very simple exercise of limiting ourselves to something called disruption, which manifests as crisscrossing without violating an agreed responsibility assignment matrix. We are not going to violate this, but how do I know both of them blend? What is the way in which we talk about all these terminology is nice. Earlier on we talked about roadmaps and milestones, now we talked about deliverables, we are talking about work which is so intangible, so abstract. Neither there is a material instinct that will tell me that as I progress I will automatically get a feel for the materials and go ahead. It does not tell that. Work in the context of WS means work products or deliverables, not the effort itself. So, when we were talking about work in the earlier context, it tells the time, it tells the effort. Most of the time we have been solving those problems, work and time problems. I do not know, in schools it was there in mathematics, work and time problems which manifest like that. One brick takes 1 hour to make and it costs 100 rupees. In 8 hours, how many bricks will come? What is the cost of making? So, the time and effort are also not visible. Our work therefore is a work product called deliverable, and from this if you start building back, we understand why it is wise to talk about a workflow. As it flows, we will understand more, as that is how we talked about why do I think that all these ideas will converge. We have a definitive goal. This is appealing. Goldratt wrote this book, The Goal. It is appealing. If you have a goal that is clearly specified, then yes, it becomes readily understandable that both work breakdown structure and workflow, with all those differences, all those unifying factors, all those ideas which we are talking about, will happen. What is the way in which I will assure myself? The beginning of quality metrics, that is goal, question, metric. All quality processes, all quality based software quality management, everything falls under the biggest umbrella called GQM, goal, question, metric. From this simple idea, we started bringing out many processes. Today, if we want to migrate, as we said, to what we keep stating, it is only quality that happens here, everything else is understood. Whether we talk work, whether we talk breakdown, whether we talk about workflow, whatever it is understood, it is only quality that happens here. What is that quality reflected as? Set of metrics. How do you draw the metrics? Goal, question, metrics. So, the GQM is a wonderful unifier of anything that you are doing. The rigidity of the yesteryear's imposition of an organizational breakdown structure, a risk breakdown structure on the work breakdown structure and the resources is not seen anymore. There is plenty of flexibility, there is plenty of meaning and purpose for talking about a matrix that tells that crisscross, many things will happen, this is your role, this is your responsibility. But then what is necessary? Traceability. When will that traceability come? When that is aligned to a job. This is your job, this is a job role, this job does only this. So, multiple roles can happen, an actor can be doing this in this particular use case, an actor may be doing something else in another use case, all these things are matters of detail. There is a piece of software, WBS Chart Pro, I am introducing one more tool. There are plenty of tools now, lot of people gotten into work breakdown structure, we do it as a nice exercise and link it to other organizational breakdown structures, risk breakdown structure, resource breakdown structure, all these things are absolutely necessary. Now, where does it breaks in the project or into the hierarchy? Who should do what? It is necessary, creates a clear project structure, avoids risk of missing project elements, enables clarity of high level planning. So, if you have an organizational chart, it is normally called a hierarchy chart. We are not even talking about anything other than a hierarchy chart. Very respectable hierarchy is a reflection of the organization and the way it is showing the potential. We talk about investments, public issues, they look at all these things necessary. That is how things happen. You have to show the organizational chart, goes to a public issue, the share value, the share market, the business dynamics, the finances are all understandably like that, none can really change it, nobody wants to change it either. But then instead of addressing the mammoth structural changes in the organization, a workflow which tells that the roles and responsibilities will be like this, it helps us grow globally. Distances vanish, because that is how we are talking about it. We have always been positioning the same way, saying that it should be global is what we have been talking about. There is no need to make sure that all that scoping is localizable. Very quickly we locate that slide and then we see this saying that done defined with a good scoping. This is where we said what is the scoping going to do? The scope breakdown structure, it is clearly telling geographically discrete component. So, while the rigidity in this exercise is appreciated for the earlier industrial work, now we are calling it industry 4.0, which talks the same thing. This is how we arrived at it. Makes sense, makes a lot of business sense, the distances vanish, and then we talk about everything in terms of what is called goal, question, metric. But this is necessary, the work breakdown structure, because this is the simplest way anything can be aligned to the entire organization, the way the people, the roles, everything, the cost of the issue, how the dynamics change. So, a typical project summary is like this: design phase, first design phase, second design phase, all this is fine. But then what we need to understand is that in the field of software, it is very difficult to keep up these estimates, both time and cost. That is where the concern is. We have been severely stretched on both. Area is different. It is not to compare with any other exercise. So, it is easy to talk. Yeah, it takes 570 hours, costs so much. Task 4 is there, 25 hours. But then can I do the task 4 first, beginning of a flow? Is there a possibility? Well, in this kind of an exercise, no, task 4 is a coding exercise. So, we have to find out how 1.1.2 relates to task 4, same level first. How do you decide? Something tells us that if we start with task 4, it is easier. How do we decide that? So, we have been saying that should we wait for the entire planning to happen? This is where we began to look at the basics of software engineering, the foundations which told us that these are the phases. You need to break it down, because it is so soft, it is so plastic, there is nothing so rigid. What is the reason why I can't start with task 4? I can in theory. It is a coding exercise, that does not matter to me. I will start with task 4, tell me what is this task, I will do that. So, we said that let there be phases, let there be a life cycle, let that is necessary, because unless you have a grip on how this mix and matching is happening, you would not sight the goal at all. It is very difficult in the field of abstraction to just sight the goal and then make it happen. So, we have been facing all these contexts, and with enormous experience we know that we need to understand that WBS is a good thought process tool, it is a good architectural design tool. At the thought level, there is a unification which is cashing on the rich experience accrued in this method. There is a planning tool, the project status reporting tool, I am skipping all that. Now, why should I believe that if I do this many small pieces of works, the big work is completed? What is the guarantee? It is not a new question again. What is the guarantee that if I do this many work pieces, the work is completed? The WBS is developed as part of a joint planning session, but how do you know that you have done this right? Each activity must possess 6 characteristics to be considered complete. That is completely decomposed. The 6 characteristics: status, completion is measurable, state and events are clearly defined, that is the start and end events are clearly defined, activity was a deliverable, time cost is easily estimated, activity duration is within acceptable limits, work assignments are independent. If these 6 characteristics are there, then I will look at all those small pieces of work, each one having this many characteristics, put together I will find out how much of that completeness is happening. So, we can review all that in detail, but in summary, the work breakdown structure is used to define the activities that are then further managed. It is not that it is completed, it is at the start. So, once again the traditional way of industry's functioning, the business directives are all along the lines of work breakdown structure, the product breakdown structure and the scope breakdown structure. Use common sense in break down the project, that is what we talk about. Now, the concern here has all along been the same, saying that it is not merely identifying the tasks, but acknowledging that the tasks are interrelated, they have dependencies, they simply have dependencies. I cannot start this lecture until the camera is switched on, the camera is in front of me, it is no guarantee that I can start lecturing. There is no reason why I should believe that straight away I can come and lecture until the voice has been reattested. Each time I am coming, I have come n number of times now, let us say 25 times. So, my voice is automatically known. but then they have a protocol which I do not know why it is there, it is there. Each time I will have to go through that voice test, approved, camera on, then I can talk. So, there are dependencies, they are small tasks, but then there is dependency. So, what we thought all along is when we are tasking ourselves, we come closer to the operations. When we are talking about functionality, we are talking at the higher level. So, once again the same case of making a workflow understandable, and there is a good tool, Microsoft Project. MS Project is well known, it has a good workflow, allows rapid development of milestones. WBS details can be developed in conjunction with specific teams. Ideally, this is how the sequence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. It starts here and then it goes all the way, loops into this. So, please understand that you cannot start here. Number 4, you have to start here, the sequence is automatically determined, it is quite rigid about it, that is how it is. So, the next idea, tying up the work pieces to teams, team projects, work breakdown structure, you can link it up. A fellow may be doing a bit of design, bit of code inspection, bit of software componentization, or we do not know where it is, how to track teams, how the teams interact. Communication is something which is very essential to understand. For quite some time there was a strong rigidity in who can talk to whom, it was absolutely essential. Gradually the workflow has changed the organizational culture. In that sense, we have created what is called a disruption in the way in which the organizational behavior is happening. Hybrid project management flow for the agile, Scrum is agile, play Scrum. We talked about sprints. So, now you see the feedback and the flow, feedback is orange loop and the flow is the blue color loop. So, feedback and flow almost go simultaneously, it is a good design. Play Scrum is very nicely designed to talk about a workflow with feedback. It is not that work starts here and flows and we will be at the end of the work to get whatever comes. There is a feedback loop, there is a way in which we can go ahead and then link it up to the customer feedback, to the product requirements. So, this is what we eventually see. Now, we have a very polished tool that talks about data gathering, that talks about model construction, that talks about model validation. There is a color code for each of that. If you look at the color code, you can tell multiple layers are there, definition of production scenarios, evaluation of production scenarios, the risk analysis, the subsidence model, they are not cascaded, they are not simply sequential, there is a good mix and match. It is something like a typical VLSI diagram. A couple of days back, I was participating in a webinar by the Mentor Graphics. They were talking about a tool, Visio, where they were talking about a visualizing tool for debugging, context aware debugging of heterogeneous applications. It is a wonderful tool, very sophisticated tool. We can talk about all that, it is hardware, software, irrespective of where it is. So, today there is no reason to believe that this is happening here. Whatever is called I.14 can happen anywhere in India, anywhere in the world. It does not make any difference for me, as long as it is indicating that it is done as per the workflow requirements and we have not lost sight of the goal. So, today we have a wonderful tooling again, which tells us at what layer what is happening, multiple layer. There was a point in time when all these were limited to the domain of VLSI. VLSI circuits, the design and everything was thriving on such an idea. And now we talk about a global tool which is like that, it visualizes wherever they are happening, I can sit in one place and track, find out what is happening. Where is that trackability coming from? Coming from the metrics. Where are the metrics coming from? A prior agreed goal. And who derived these metrics? Ideally all of us should. We will ask our questions, we will derive the metrics, but then what is happening? The success rate of software development exercises has been so dismally low that none of us want to take such a big risk of starting from the scratch each time we begin. What are the earlier case studies? So, thankfully, we have some copybook ideas of life cycle models. These are standard life cycle models. Some life cycle models where people have tried to experiment outside of the copybook and succeed are available on the net for purchase. They said this is how we did, this is the trick which we played. Well, the point is, the more generosity in all these things we can manage, the better it is. Nothing very specific, but then what we need to understand here very carefully is the fact that outside of the life cycle we also need next idea called process, which shifts everything to quality, quality as directed by goal, question, metric. So, the dashboard will come, the metrics will come, you can simply go and click on 1.4, the entire history explodes, tells where it is happening, who is currently at work. It's quite possible to build such a kind of a work environment where there is a trackability, there is a traceability. Most of the times we have been mixing up the ideas of trackability and traceability. We track what has gone into the workflow, we trace what is happening all the way to the requirements. So, we want traceability which is moving up. So, having said this, the essence of a work breakdown structure is to help you define a process, which is again your definition, what is there which you can use, the quality frameworks, the standard frameworks. What are the standard frameworks? There are many. Standards evolve. One of the most well known standard is ISO 9001:2000. It has also evolved, but then somewhere in the middle the upward compatibility was not seamless. People have used the earlier editions of this standard, ISO standard, the upward compatibility was not so smooth. Other one which has stabilized by around 2000 is the CMM integrated, the upward compatibility is assured. So, what we therefore understand is, once you have a very clear goal, then everything falls in place automatically. We move from life cycle to process to metrics, metrics to systems, whatever you want to do, we can do that in a software project management model. After this, what we need to very carefully understand is that a work breakdown structure captures all work of a project in organized way. A tabular list of elements, we have defined this. An element is in our dictionary. Breaking large complex projects into progressively smaller pieces. The work packages that may include a number of tasks continue to refine until packages are of suitable size. In theory, we are not really concerned about the granularity of the task. How big is the task? That is up to you. But then what we know in software is a golden rule in design: maximize cohesion, minimize coupling. That is, the larger the task, the coarse the task, the better it is for the development, because it does not communicate with other tasks. It should be a big chunk of work, whatever it is. So, maximize cohesion, minimize coupling is a way in which we divide and conquer. It is a principle, the governing principle which tells that you do this: maximize cohesion, minimize coupling. So, having come up to this point, we also need to make sure that decomposition is usually performed as a top down hierarchical manner. The way in which we do decomposition is top down, the way we do composition or construction is bottom up. What is object oriented analysis doing? It is doing both simultaneously, and as it brings down, it is also giving a traceability that tells that what and all can be traced all along on the upward direction, that is towards the business. So, this much happens in the world of what we said, the use case driven, requirements driven, business driven. How did it all start? Only after the UML has stabilized, roughly 2002, 2003, a set of tools we have been discussing, but they are also software pieces. Why should we believe them? That overall success rate of 36% governs all software engineering exercises. So, after doing all this, we need to understand that there is a very important step which we need to understand, and that is what is called the verification and validation. So, what we have to see is UML verification and validation. The very first slide is very deliberately called non-UML models. Till today, there are so many models that are non-UML which are still operational in software development. They still work, not that they did not work. Some people have phenomenal expertise on these models, they just do it by inspection. We will have a transducer kind of an exercise of converting that expertise into what UML fellows want to do. Goal models capture strategic goals of stakeholders, good for exploring how and why questions with stakeholders, good for realizing trade-offs, especially over design choices. Engineering is replete with art of compromises, trade-offs. We need to understand where to make a trade-off, and that is how we keep talking about. Some time back we were talking about what is called competition. This is also a point of discussion. It cannot be a competition like what it could have been earlier on, it should be co-opetition. We will have some trade-offs, we have some ways of working, some cooperation, some competition. So, we make choices, we have a way of working towards. So, when we talked about goal models, which is how we started, we stopped the earlier lecture, the goal models are essential. How do you define, how do you arrive? It is still in the non-UML zone. Most of it is in the non-UML zone. To define a goal, you do not have to study UML. It is very deliberately done like this. Fault tree model as an example of risk analysis, capture potential. These are well known exercises. We are trying to understand the way in which they can be put together and still aligned to UML, or in other words, even though UML has stabilized over the last 18 years or so, it is still not perfect. All people are not so happy, because at the end of the day, when they get to doing verification and validation, it is not so obvious. It should have been, but it is not obvious. Till today it is a challenge. V&V remains a 60-year-old grand challenge in software, when it was only 15 lines, when it was only 50 lines, when it was only 500 lines. We are developing working solutions. The idea of correctness is something which we have been talking about differently in the field of software engineering, for all the aforesaid reasons and the way we talked about it. So, the goal model is essentially a non-UML exercise. Even today, it is easier to spot the goal when we are coming from outside of the UML. Likewise, the fault tree models have created that kind of a depth of perception and expertise. People just do it by inspection. We are not likely to talk about a risk breakdown, we are talking about a fault tree. Now, what is the error in this? The error in this is that it builds more on the material sense, which vanishes very fast as we move upwards. The fault tree model at the lower levels has been very good. Entity relationship models, we will talk about this in the next lecture. Thank you very much. So, having done all these using some tools, using some ideas, how do you know when put together all this works? That is the question which we are asking. More importantly, how do you know that that is exactly what the user wanted? It cannot be done at the fag end, it should be done right from the step 1. We make provisions right from the step 1. Verification, is it doing what you have said it is doing? Validation, is it what the stakeholders wanted, the business wanted? So, even though we have had some wonderful ideas on business driven, use case driven, requirements driven and many other test driven, so many ideas, at the end of the day, what is the core question? Verification and validation, a 60-year-old grand challenge, which we will see in the next lecture. Thank you. We will meet in the next lecture.